Good morning. We come to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis 22 in these video devotions, Genesis 22, and we're going to see this offering of Isaac. And I'm going to just jump right in here. By the way, I want to say that sometimes this is a very difficult passage, but this is a passage where God is using a lesson to teach that the Hebrew people, the Christians, are not to do human sacrifices. In a pagan world where they sacrifice babies often and all the time, God is showing at the end of this passage that that is not how Christians do things. Christians do not sacrifice their young. And he has a physical example. As we get into Genesis 22, for the secular or even for the Christian, when they read this, maybe for the first time, if they've never read it, or when they think with kind of new eyes at this passage, they could think, how could this loving God ask Abram to sacrifice his son? Well, a few things here. We're going to notice in the very beginning verbiage here that especially if you look at the Hebrew, God speaks very lovingly to Abraham. You know, take your son, your only son. He almost says, my dear Abraham, especially when you look at the Hebrew, my dear Abraham. You know, and he uses his covenant name, Abraham, father of nations. The other thing is, many times we think of Abram as the faithful one. Abram had faith, and Hebrews says that faith allowed him to trust God, and by that faith he was saved, not by circumcision or this or by any other works. He was saved by faith. But Abraham lacked faith in many ways too. We've already talked about this in Genesis 13 and then again a few chapters ago, where he didn't trust God enough, so he lied and said Sarah was his sister instead of his wife. We also saw where he could not believe that God would give him a son in his elderly age. So he went into Hagar and had Ishmael. We also saw even after Ishmael was born, God's given him the promises of a son. And Abraham is saying, oh, can't Ishmael be the chosen one? He lacked faith in many ways. So let's look at this. Genesis 22. Now it came about after these things, after what had happened with the covenant with Abimelech, that God tested Abraham, and God said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. Notice this, emphasis, your son, your only son, this test. So Abram rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abram raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abram said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Notice how he said, we will return. We will return. Later on in the book of Hebrews, it's chapter 12, I believe, it shows that Abraham thought that God was going to bring Isaac back, and that reframes it too. Abraham, verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He took in his hand the fire and the knife, so the two of them walked together. Isaac is not a 2-year-old. Isaac is likely 12 years old or older, okay? A young man carrying this wood up. Isaac spoke to Abram, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Isaac knows you need a lamb. Abram said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abram built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abram stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called in from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham, and he said, here I am. The angel of the Lord said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now, remember, this is prophesying Jesus, where someday God will slay his own son for our sins. Verse 13. Then Abram raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abram went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abram called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, as it is this day. In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. The Lord will provide. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abram a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abram returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abram lived at Beersheba. Now it came about after these things that it was told Abram, saying, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, and Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hezah, and Pildash, and Jodlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abram's brother. His concubine, whose name was Ruhumah, also bore Tebah and Gaham and Tahash and Makkah. So there's a little bit of ancestry stuff right there. We're going to stop right there. So that's Genesis 22. Hope this blessed your walk with the Lord. Have a good day. God bless.